The $47 billion illusion of WeWork. Welcome. Have you ever wondered how a basic idea, like leasing an office, putting a few potted plants in it and a free kombucha tap in it, and subleasing it at a markup, could be valued at $47 billion? How does a real estate broker, armed with buzzwords, a tailored suit, and long hair, transform into a savior of humanity seeking to elevate the collective consciousness? What we are dissecting today is not just a mundane business failure, but a systematic destruction of the global investment mind. It is the story of WeWork, the most vivid modern example of how growth delusions can turn into an economic cult, and how willful ignorance of scientific and logical principles leads to one of the largest financial train wrecks in history. We will analyze how real-world data was manipulated, how investors fell for childish logical fallacies, and how decision-making driven by temporary euphoria instead of institutional survival and pain reduction triggered a catastrophic collapse that rattled both Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Chapter 1: The Birth of an Empire and the Savior Tech Delusion. Let us travel back to the beginning. In 2008, in the immediate aftermath of the global financial crisis that wrecked markets, a young Israeli man named Adam Neumann met architect Miguel McKelvey in New York. Both noticed vast amounts of empty office space across the city, juxtaposed against a rising surge of freelancers and startups lacking the capital for long-term tenure leases. Thus, a simple idea was born: Green Desk, built on leasing spaces, partitioning them, and subleasing them with flexible terms. They later sold that venture, and in February 2010, Neumann and McKelvey officially founded WeWork in New York's Soho district. The underlying business model of WeWork was fundamentally simple and traditional: lease long-term at wholesale rates and sublease short-term at retail prices. This model had existed for decades and was practiced by global giants like IWG or Regus. However, Adam Neumann understood a fundamental truth about high finance. Traditional real estate companies are valued at low earnings multiples, typically 1 to 2 times revenue, whereas technology companies enjoy insane multiples of 20 to 30 times revenue. Here began the first step in data manipulation. Neumann did not pitch WeWork as a real estate firm. He marketed it as a technology company offering space as a service, going so far as to invent vague marketing rhetoric claiming the company was not renting desks but building a physical social network aimed at elevating the collective consciousness. By 2017, this illusion reached its zenith when Masayoshi Son, the Japanese billionaire and CEO of SoftBank, entered the scene through the Vision Fund. In a ride in Neumann's car that lasted a mere 28 minutes, Son decided to inject billions of dollars into the company, convinced that Neumann was the next Steve Jobs, urging him not to settle for organic growth, but to make the company 10 times bigger and act with greater madness. WeWork's valuation grew like a malignant tumor, scaling from a few billion to $47 billion by early 2019, becoming one of the most valuable startups on Earth, even as it was bleeding millions of dollars every single day. Chapter 2: Systematic Obfuscation and Distortion of Scientific Data. If we apply scientific analytical tools to WeWork's model, we find that the entire enterprise operated on a flagrant violation of data collection and systematic critique. Sound scientific methodology begins with accurate description of reality, followed by rigorous critique of hypotheses, and finally, measurable inference. What did WeWork's management do instead? They engaged in deliberate obfuscation of reality by conflating concepts and warping financial metrics. In any rational financial analysis of a real estate business environment, one core variable quantifies risk: the asset-liability mismatch. WeWork signed long-term binding leases extending 15 to 20 years with property owners, fixed liabilities that could not be revoked, while subleasing those spaces to members on short-term contracts ranging from 1 month to a year, variable revenues extremely sensitive to economic inflations. In the event of an economic downturn, members would cancel subscriptions immediately, while WeWork remained legally bound to pay massive rents to landlords. This is not complex analysis, it's elementary school arithmetic. Yet Newman and his executive team, attempting to bypass this obvious scientific critique, invented a fictitious financial metric they dubbed community-adjusted EBITDA. This bizarre metric stripped away fundamental operational costs, rents, and sales expenses from the accounting equation, making unprofitable spaces appear ridiculously lucrative. Here, investors fell squarely into begging the question, where the company assumed an unproven premise that rapid top-line growth proves the validity of the business model and used that inflated valuation as proof of success to justify leapfrogging grounded financial facts. Furthermore, this phase dramatically exposed the appeal to authority. Whenever an analytical observer attempted to critique the operational framework and present real data showing that losses doubled with every new location opened, the canned response was, "How can you question a company where a figure like Masayoshi Son, the titan of venture capital, poured billions in?" Scientific and logical reasoning was completely shelved in favor of blind trust in financial authority, dragging everyone into a collective hysteria that obscured the true market environment. Chapter 3: Engineering Suicidal Decisions and Ignoring the Survival Imperative. When we place the decisions made by WeWork's leadership under the microscope, we discover they were executed in total isolation from the primary imperative of any institution, prioritizing survival and pain reduction over short-term euphoria and speculative gain. Instead of utilizing the massive cash injections from SoftBank to build liquidity buffers, mitigate risks, and ease the pain of overexpansion, Adam Neumann made decisions directly opposing logical reasoning. Hundreds of millions were squandered acquiring companies completely unrelated to core operations, a wave pool surfboard maker, a private school venture called WeGrow, and even a communal living initiative named WeLive. Decisions were driven by a desire to boost personal ego and euphoria rather than modifying operational variables to reduce impending risks. At this exact stage, SoftBank's leadership and investors succumbed to the sunk cost fallacy. Every time financial statements revealed that WeWork was burning hundreds of millions monthly with no path to profitability, investors rationalized, "We have already invested billions. If we do not throw in more to fuel expansion, we will never recover our capital through an IPO." Instead of accepting a realistic loss and adjusting corporate behavior to protect institutional survival, additional billions were burned to feed a structurally broken model. The failure did not stop at financial recklessness, it extended to blatant violations of corporate governance. Neumann began treating the company as his personal fiefdom, purchasing properties in his own name and leasing them back to WeWork at inflated prices, and registering the trademark for the word "we" under a private entity, only to sell it back to his own company, WeWork, for $5.9 million. This pattern of decision-making was built on special pleading, where Neumann positioned himself as an exceptional leader immune to standard ethical rules, framing these self-dealing maneuvers as a small fee the world owed his genius. These actions dismantled the company's institutional immune system, leaving its survival entirely dependent on continuous external cash injections rather than a rational scientific model that generates real profit and minimizes debt-induced distress. Chapter 4: The Final Reckoning and Collapse of the Grand Charade. In August 2019, the Grand Charade reached its final act and countdown to reality. WeWork filed its S-1 registration statement with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission ahead of its planned initial public offering. This filing was not merely a legal requirement, it was the moment illusion collided head-on with the unyielding wall of reality, laying bare hidden data before the world and subjecting the company to its first impartial scientific critique, far removed from Neumann's charismatic spell. The documents revealed horrifying numbers. In 2018 alone, WeWork generated $1.8 billion in revenue, but lost a staggering $1.6 billion. The company was literally losing more the faster it expanded. Crucially, the filing exposed $47 billion in long-term lease commitments against short-term member contracts worth only a fraction of that figure. Financial media and Wall Street analysts erupted in mockery and outrage. The appeal to emotion used by Newman in the filing's dedication, where he dedicated the document to the energy of we greater than any one of us, was exposed as a cheap emotional plea hiding structural rot and managerial corruption. Within weeks, the company's expected valuation plunged from $47 billion to less than $10 billion. The IPO was humiliatingly pulled, and market confidence vanished. To save the physical survival of the entity, the board of directors forced Adam Neumann out as CEO in September 2019, though not without granting him a golden parachute exceeding $1 billion. He walked away with immense wealth, while thousands of employees faced mass layoffs and watched their equity value evaporate. The company entered a slow, bleeding decline, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, which emptied office spaces and crushed remaining recovery hopes. In November 2023, WeWork officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, saddled with massive liabilities, bringing a definitive end to one of the largest valuation bubbles in modern history. Conclusion: the mirror of illusion and the final logical lesson. The story of WeWork is not merely an isolated event in corporate history. It is a profound lesson on the dangers of prioritizing illusions and emotions over logical thinking and rigorous scientific analysis. It reminds us that mathematics possesses no feelings and that fundamental economic laws cannot be tricked forever by rebranding concepts with shiny buzzwords. When the scientific method is stripped from data collection, and when the imperative of survival and pain reduction is sidelined for rapid artificial inflation, collapse ceases to be a mere risk, it becomes a mathematical certainty. The true tragedy was not in the concept of office subleasing, but in the collective eagerness of Wall Street and Silicon Valley to believe in magic, ignore empirical reality, and succumb to a chain of logical fallacies that ultimately dissolved tens of billions of dollars into thin air. What did you gain from the video?